Om Amriteshwari Namaha, everyone. Welcome to the Bhagavad Gita class again. We will begin by chanting the Bhagavad Gita shloka, dhyana shloka. So please chant along. We'll have the verses on the screen. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatva Manusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapanaye Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopalanandanaha Partho Vatsya Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahatam Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Once again, welcome. As you can see, we're here in a different room. This is the Swami house here in Chicago Ashram because we're under lockdown. Not COVID lockdown, snowstorm lockdown. A big snowstorm. So we'll be doing it from this location tonight. We're in chapter 12. And we've covered up to verse 12 of that chapter. And Krishna has been talking about 5 levels of devotion, of which the most important point was that bhakti is not a particular sadhana, but a series of sadhanas. So he's guiding us through that process of the series of sadhanas. One is the notion that you receive all of the results of your actions as God's prasad. That's called prasada buddhi. And then once we are able to do that successfully, then we try to offer all of our actions to God, or we could say for those of us who are Amma's devotees, to Amma. And that's called Ishvara Arpana Buddhi. It's a little more difficult because there are restrictions to what kind of things we can offer to God. So we can't offer all of our selfishness through actions. We can ask God to take them away from us, Ammas to take them away from us. But offering a selfish thing to Amma is a little bit off of the mark on this one. It should be things that are intended to be pure and out of devotion. Then, if we get that somewhat straight for some time, then we can probably, we will have a better sense of concentration on the Guru and on God. And that makes it easier for us to visualize the Lord's form within us, or what Amma calls our Ishta Devada, so our beloved deity. It is easier to visualize that beloved deity after we have acquired some experience in the first 2 steps. And then I think a lot of us are probably in the phase where we are still trying to visualize the the Guru's form, God's form in our heart consistently for a long period of time. But once that becomes natural to us, there's another step which is called Viradupasana, or it is worshipping of the universal form, God's universal form. Now that universal form is something that all of us would love to be able to see, but the problem is that the mind doesn't have a craving or a personal connection with the whole universe. So it's much more different. It's much more difficult, for sure. Also, but we have to eventually understand that Amma, or your beloved deity's form, is everywhere throughout the whole universe. So we cannot escape this step, but we need time to perfect it or to become accustomed to it. Then after that, we will be able to see, to perceive, or to appreciate God's formless aspect. So we need to be able to be able to do all of these levels of devotion. That's what Lord Krishna was talking about so far. So all of those 5 stages, except for the last one, involve a form and some attributes. But the final stage, the final level, does not rely on any attributes or form. That's why it's called Nirguna, or the formless absolute. Worship of the formless absolute. And that last step can only be reached by the grace of a self-realized guru, only by Amma's grace, because we need their knowledge of the self, and we need to assimilate that, we need to absorb that through consistent and dedicated reading and listening to their teachings, meditating on them, and assimilating them, making them part of us, part and parcel of our being. This is the only way to reach that final step of devotion, where the feeling of difference between us and God disappears completely. There's no difference between the worshipper and God. And such a devotee is called a Parabhakta, Advaita Bhakta, Abheda Bhakta, Nirguna Bhakta. There's many different names. They all mean the same thing. A person, a seeker who worships God or has devotion for God in the formless aspect. Formless aspect is actually considered to be the highest possible way of seeing God, because it is the most subtle and it is also the most universal. If we have certain specific forms, then some people may appreciate them, may not appreciate them, and also we cannot unify all the people of the world on one form. So if it's formless, at one point everybody can appreciate that, and it's also the only way that we can see ourselves as being one with God. Because my body is like this, God is everything, so how can we be the same thing? So when you look at the formless absolute, which is pure consciousness, that is the only way in which we can truly realize our oneness with God. And one beautiful part of India's tradition is that it accommodates all types of people. Nobody's forced to worship any particular form, or the formless for that matter. Of course, since God is all-pervading, there cannot be an actual form, because one form cannot pervade everywhere. So we can never confine God to a statue or a place of worship. At the same time, Amma says we're not trying to confine God to a statue or a picture. Some people question her about that, and this is one response she's given. To say that God is all-pervading, but he is not in an image, that is a contradiction. Some people ask, does God live in an idol? Shouldn't we be worshipping the sculptor who made the idol instead? These are the kind of arguments they put forth. And Amma says, but when you look at a picture of your father, is it your father or the photographer that you see and think of? Obviously, it's your father. So God is everywhere. We cannot see him with these eyes, but seeing the idol in the temple, we remember him. That remembrance will bring purity and sanctity to our minds. Temples and idols are needed for those of us who are drowned in ignorance. This is the point. We are drowned in ignorance. In this case, ignorance means we're seeing duality, and we're seeing a difference between ourselves and God. So if you walk into a temple and you have this feeling that God and I are separate, and someone says, just sit in the corner and meditate on nothing, you won't get it. You see a idol or a sculpture of Rama or a photo of Amma, and you remember, and you can identify. That's because we need that, because we are spiritually ignorant. That's the definition of spiritual ignorance, a feeling of separation from God. So because of that, Amma not only accepts and tolerates our spiritual ignorance, she respects and even promotes the customs that come from that ignorance, or we should say customs that have been created for the sake of people like us. Because, let's face it, most of us are not ready to transition to the formless absolute, just only focusing on God in that way. So Amma has no choice but to talk from the standpoint of duality, of multiplicity, because her worldwide audience needs that. And more importantly, we ourselves should understand what type of bhakti, what type of devotion suits us best. Some people might point to Mahatmas like Ramana Maharshi, saying he never had a guru, he never meditated on any form. But Amma says such souls are very, very rare. There's only one Ramana Maharshi, and if it was so easy, all of us should be like that. And there should be many examples like Ramana Maharshi, but everybody quotes that one name. So a lot of people don't know that Ramana was actually a great devotee as well. And he endorsed the same progression mentioned in this chapter, that you start with offering, one level, and then I won't repeat the whole thing. From step by step, you achieve concentration. You can actually meditate on the formless absolute. And his conclusion is things happen naturally in accordance with the samskaras. Samskaras mean culture from previous births. That means if we're not able to do it now, we probably didn't make enough effort in the previous life. So now we have to make more effort. And this momentum we create in this birth will become the samskara in a future birth. We may not want to think about a future birth, but if there is one, everything we do now will help us create more momentum in the next life. And Krishna talks about that also in the 6th chapter. What happens for someone who strives for realization but doesn't reach it in this birth? You don't start from the beginning all over again. You pick up where you left off. So like Ramana says, the path of bhakti that suits us depends on our samskara, our inherited tendencies. We created them. They're not really inherited. It's an inheritance we give ourselves. So let's be honest about it. We can start with a form, the saguna bhakti we call it, devotion to a form, and that will gradually expand our mind. And then that more expansive mind will start to crave something even more expansive. Ultimately, it will crave the formless, an infinite form, infinite expansiveness. If you want infinite expansiveness, there can be no border, there can be no delimiting factors, so it has to be formless. But don't expect it to happen suddenly, or you may be disappointed. It takes time for the mind to expand, just like a baby grows slowly. It seems fast when you haven't seen them for a long time, but it's a slow process. But that process can be accelerated tremendously through cultivating a relationship with a realized master. That's why we're so fortunate to have Amma in our lives. She will help us dedicate ourselves to what is called Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasanam, which is the process of hearing or reading the Guru's teachings, contemplating on them, and meditating on them very deeply so that we assimilate them and make them our own. She doesn't do this just for adults. She's doing it for children. And if you go to Amritapuri, especially these days, the children are on fire because Amma is creating that Guru Shishya Bandham, the Guru Shishya connection with them, that relationship. And during bhajans, she will ask them questions, and they're so eager to answer the questions because they have innocence and they have that yearning to know. The other day, I heard that one of the brahmacharinis was giving a talk, and she was about to chant a Gita verse, a verse from the Gita, 15th chapter. So she said, I'm going to chant this verse. And even before she started chanting it, the little kids on the floor in front of the stage started chanting it before she could even start. They had it memorized. And she thought it was so funny. She struggled to chant it herself because she was laughing. So this is what that guru relationship, guru-disciple relationship does, especially from a young age. So for the rest of chapter 12, Lord Krishna is going to provide a description of the person who has passed through all those levels of devotion and is now established in knowledge of God, which means knowledge of the formless aspect as well. What we said before was that starting with the form is fine, and Amma she comes down intentionally to the level of the form for us, and sometimes such Mahatmas say they do it just for the sweetness. They want to relish that sweetness. So they can do both at will. But the difficulty is to be able to concentrate on the formless, which is our own self. So he's going to give a description of someone who has reached that level, who has attained knowledge of the self and is a worshipper or a devotee of that. It means someone who has known the self, who is God realized. So there are so many different names, like I said before. Basically, they all boil down to a knower of truth. And the truth is one's own self and the oneness of the self with God. So this is also in some ways similar to the section that came at the end of chapter 2, when Krishna explains the characteristics of a knower of the truth, a man of steady knowledge, a person of steady knowledge of the self. So only difference is that now we're going to get lots of details about that. And just today alone, I think we have about 28 characteristics that are going to come, so we better keep moving here. One thing to remember before I enter those qualities is don't think that this supreme devotion is a glorified version of what we all do right now. Don't think that just by chanting more archana, more mantra japa, more puja, we're automatically going to reach that state. All of these things definitely help, and that's why Amma is encouraging us to do them. But that supreme devotion is possible only when we assimilate the spiritual understanding and knowledge that Amma's trying to give us. She's, with great difficulty, she's fighting against our ignorance. And sometimes we inadvertently fight back. That's the problem. She wants us to understand Tattva Tile Bhakti. So I'm going to keep repeating that word because she uses it quite a lot. It means devotion founded in proper understanding, spiritual principles. So then when we get, as and when that understanding deepens, the effect of the same sadhana will be augmented significantly. We just have to simultaneously make the effort to deepen our spiritual understanding. And the knowledge that we acquire through Amma is like the milk that nourishes and ripens our bhakti. So just remember that your ignorance of who you are, of who Amma is the only thing that's preventing you from becoming one with her. It's not that you're not, not that you're not singing bhajans enough or you're not doing archana enough. That's part of it, but ultimately it's our ignorance, spiritual ignorance. So we need to understand Amma's more subtle aspects, God's subtler aspects as well. Because until we understand our own self better, then we can never fully give over our heart to Amma. There will always be this feeling of separation. Okay, I love Amma, but then I have my life, I have my kids, my family, my job, and then there's a me and you, Amma, which is, it's sweet and it's beautiful and it's full of love and affection, but it's not enough to go beyond the feeling of duality. If we really want to become one with Amma, we are going to have to relinquish the I and the feeling of separation completely. Only then can we have 100% love for God, for Amma. Now, Krishna is explaining these characteristics in great detail for reasons. It's not just a monologue for fun. He knows that this journey that we're now on is going to require a lot of effort, much more than we would imagine. So we need to be motivated. We need to be able to sustain our motivation. And by explaining the state of such a knower of the truth, a true knower of God, who is also a true devotee of God, what kind of state they live in all the time, it sounds so glorious. It's like, my gosh, all my problems will be solved if I can reach that state. So then we get that motivation to make the effort. So that's one reason. Another reason is because all the qualities that he's going to describe are the qualities that we need to inculcate, we need to cultivate. That means that whatever comes naturally to Amma is our homework assignment, basically. We have to make effort to attain that. Even just a little bit, if we can do it, that's progress. The goal is to sustain it always, which is definitely much more difficult. But at least we have a list of all these qualities that we need to cultivate. And we can refer to them over and over again today. Was I able to do this or not? So, if we want to keep track and monitor our progress, it serves as a really good system. And we can emulate Amma with an understanding of where we're going to, not just emulating her on the surface. We know that, that's too easy to just do it on the surface. Some people, even during Amma's bhajans, they will go like this, like Amma does that with her hand. They just imitate it. If you ask them what it is, they won't have any explanation because only Amma knows. And she cannot even explain it. She said it just happens naturally. So we need to remember these things as guidelines for our not just the formal sadhana, but inner sadhana. What kind of qualities we need to be cultivating so that we know we're getting closer and closer to Amma. So let us move into the first two verses because they go together. Verses 13 and 14 are like a couplet, you could say, and we need to chant them together. But as we go through this list of qualities, I'm thinking to myself, it would be great if someone could help me compile a list of all of them, because just today alone we have 28. There are more qualities in this chapter 12. There's qualities in chapter 2, 13, 14, 16. We'll have, a big list, but it's good to know, right? Because it's like the direction that we need to head in. It's a clear, milestone along the way, so we know that we're on the right track. Understanding, and also when we're on the wrong tracks, right? So you need these kind of benchmarks for us to keep track of our spiritual progress. Hopefully, it's a progression. So we will now chant the next verses of the Bhagavad Gita. Adveshta sarvabhutanam maitra karuna evacha nirmamo nirahamkaraha samadukha sukhakshami. santushta satatam yogi yatatma tridhanishchayaha mayarpita mano buddhir yo madbhakta same priyaha. So I hope you have the book, because it's available on the Amma Shop website, and you can follow the chanting along with me next time if you don't have it with you. I'll just transition one more time so you can see the words one more time, and I'm going to suggest a few minor suggestions sometimes, because it's kind of more closer to the original and maybe a little easier for us to understand in English. This one has very few edits though. One who is free from malice towards all, is friendly and compassionate towards all beings, free from the feelings of I and mind, even, I would say don't put the minded here. We'll do that. We'll talk about that later. We can say even in pain and pleasure, forgiving, ever content, steady in meditation, self-controlled and possessed of firm conviction, with mind and intellect fixed on me. That devotee of mine is dear to me. So in verse 13 alone, we find 11 qualities to put on our list, and the 14th verse adds another 5. So we'll go through these points one by one. Free from malice towards all. We can think of it as the universal love that we witness in Amma. Even those who mistreated her, she showed no malice to them. People who tried to kill her. There have been so many there's stories of people who were detractors of the ashram and tried to drag down the ashram and make up all kinds of stories. But Amma never had any malice towards them at all. So how does Amma love everybody? We are most concerned about ourselves, and next maybe we think of those whom we consider to be ours, my family, my children, my parents. But in Amma, that I is infinite, don't forget. It's the whole creation and beyond, because even when the creation is gone into a state of pralaya, dissolution, she still exists, right? Because she's the self. She's Brahman, she's Atman, same thing from different standpoints. So that persists even when the whole universe is dissolved. So consciousness, she knows, is also herself. So infinite even beyond the creation. Because there are times when the creation doesn't exist according to India's tradition. It's a period of complete dissolution. So, but during the creation periods, all the animals, plants, even the subtle beings, all of them, Amma understands, are part of herself. They are herself. That is real universal love. It's not just the kind we talk about in social interactions. But we can practice universal love at home. So your home, your family, your neighbors, your friends, that is kind of like a training ground for expanding our love. We start off with maximum love for ourselves, but we have to extend it to our family, community, region, state, country, and then ultimately the whole world. So when Krishna says friendly towards all beings, that means they have no reservations, no ulterior motives, no hesitation, because they don't have any special likes or dislikes. So it's not like I like this kind of person, but these people I don't like. Everybody has their preferences, right? Well, they don't have those at all. They have no allegiance to only one group, like cliques or factions. So there's no divisiveness for them. And Jnanadev, by the way, those of you who asked the question about Jnanadev, I will put the spelling in the chat window. Jnanadev, and the name of his Jnaneshwari. Okay, some people wanted to know the spelling, so there it is. Now you can find it anywhere. I mean, it's available on Amazon and whatnot. So he says here, just as the earth never knows to sustain only the superior and to reject the inferior, or just as the life force does not know how to abide only in the king's body and not that of the common folk, or just as the water never thinks of quenching only the thirst of the cows, turning itself into poison to kill tigers, in that way, he is one who befriends all living beings and is equally kind to everyone. So if you are watching for the first time, this Saint Jnanadev writes his commentary from the first person standpoint. When Arjuna is talking, he just assumes the bhava or the attitude of Arjuna, and same with Krishna. Anybody who is narrating in between, he will just take on the bhava, the viewpoint of that person, and just narrate it. He was there. That's the only thing you can imagine, is that he was in that place. He's just tuning into what took place at that time, and he narrates everything, and full of devotion. Little long, but and sometimes the English, because it's quite old translation, I kind of render it back into more modern words to make it easier for everybody to understand. The next quality is compassionate, something we are very familiar with around Amma. And compassion should be something that spontaneously arises toward a suffering person. For Amma, that just defines her whole life. Everybody in her eyes is suffering in one way or another, because we're missing out on the bliss of our self, of God realization. So even if we think we're doing wonderfully, she still has compassion for us because we haven't reached our potential. And all of her actions are based on that alone. An ocean of motiveless compassion. That's how it's described in the scriptures. Here, Shankaracharya says, it's a description of one who has compassion. He says, one who has compassion extends freedom from fear to all living beings. This is what Amma is doing and has been doing her whole life. But some people share beautiful stories of how Amma did it and continues to do it, even if she's not there physically. One of the brahmacharinis gave a satsang, and it was very touching because midway through the satsang, every day in Amritapuri there were satsangs going on, and so we were listening to them every day. And she said, she talked about some spiritual principles first, and then she talked about how she came to meet Amma. Well, it turned out that her father died when she was very little, and her mother got remarried, and the stepfather was an alcoholic. So he used to beat the mother relentlessly, and finally, I can't remember exactly what it was, he had to leave the house at one point. And then the girls and her mother had met Amma by then, and Amma was their only refuge. And one day, though, they were so happy that they had Amma and they were free from him, the stepfather. But one day he came back and he was beating the mother again. He took her outside. He had a knife in his hand. He said he was going to kill her. And the girls were screaming and saying, "Don't kill our mother! Don't kill our mother!" And then the mother herself said, prayed to Amma, Amma, you please protect me, because she has these two little girls, right? And at that moment, this stepfather, he didn't even know who Amma was. He just froze. He couldn't move. And it was so frightening for him that he dropped the knife and ran away. And he never came back. So this is how another way in which Amma extends freedom from fear to all living beings. She protects her children, even from afar. The next quality mentioned in this couplet of verses is free from the feelings of I and mine. Here, Shankaracharya says, he is the world-renouncing mendicant. So world-renouncing mendicant means even if you live in a huge house with lots of friends and big family, a lot of possessions, still his attitude or her attitude is that none of this belongs to me. I'm a beggar. I'm a mendicant. I have nothing. God is my only wealth and possession. So if you can maintain that attitude of I'm a beggar, I have nothing to my name, then that feeling of I and mine will be reduced or disappear. So another commentary on this verse is that there are two reasons why this supreme devotee has no sense of ownership. Remember, this is a knower of the self. This is a realized person. Because everything already belongs to them. If I say this is my house, that means that all the other houses are not mine. But here's a person who feels one with the universe. So why does he need or she need to claim something as his? It's like saying, this is my finger, okay? It's like, well, duh, we can see that. And I know that. So I don't have to tell anybody. I don't have to lay claim to it. I'm aware of that. Like that, they don't have to claim anything. They know everything in this whole universe is part of them. And the other reason is because they only see Brahman everywhere. They only see their own being. So there's actually nothing separate to claim for yourself. So this is not mine, this is me, at least from the physical level, right? So like that, Amma sees everybody as part of herself. Everything is part of herself. So she doesn't need to claim anything. The next point is even in pain and pleasure. Even means even-minded, of course. But how can one be possible? How can it be possible for one to be even-minded in pain and pleasure? It seems contradictory. But we have to look at Amma, and that way we can understand better. She experiences the difference between hot and humid India and an air-conditioned hall in Europe or somewhere else in the world. She knows that they're totally different, of course. She experiences the heat and people come in sweaty, and it's not comfortable, of course. But the even-mindedness is not the body, it's the mind, right? If you remove that minded there, then you get a better idea of why it can be misleading, because the Sanskrit is just even in pain and pleasure, but it means even-minded. So we, in English, when we add that even-minded part, we can understand that the body may be in intense pain or maybe, not feeling any pleasure at all, but the mind can be relaxed. So Amma's inner response to the situation is what matters. It's her inner response that determines whether she herself experiences pain and pleasure. Otherwise, it's just the body. She says, this is not me, the body is not me. She watches it. But sometimes she intentionally takes on our pain, our suffering, so that she can purify that or process that much faster, and then we have to only experience a tiny fraction of it. Shankaracharya gives a nice explanation here. He says, pleasure does not create a liking in the mind of such a devotee, and pain does not create dislike in his mind. This is such a beautiful explanation because it captures the difference between us and the supreme devotee. We invariably develop a liking for pleasure and a disliking for pain, right? You eat something that you didn't like, you're like, no, I don't like that, I don't want it. And then I like this thing because last time I tasted it, it was delicious. So they're like one and the same thing for us. And this fact has been the driving force behind human civilization since time immemorial. Things that give pleasure, we like. Things that give displeasure, we don't like. I mean, it seems obvious, and a non-realized person can never imagine it being otherwise because our mind has been trained to associate those in all circumstances. But it's not the case for a realized being. They're not necessarily connected. And we have little glimpses of that around Amma. So if you've been there for Devi Bhava, which we're all missing terribly these days in person, right? Just think about the joy and happiness we experience after a sleepless Devi Bhava. You stay up all night doing some kind of work for Amma, or you stay up much later and you get very little sleep, if any. But after that Devi Bhava is over, there's like some euphoria, some joy that we feel. That's not from pleasure, because we were enjoying it on a spiritual level, but on the physical level, it was really taxing. So it shows that we can change. We can learn step by step from Amma to relish that which is not necessarily physically pleasing. So don't write it off completely. Assume that it's possible. And a jnani, or a knower of the self, is what we're talking about. Another name is the jnani, J-N-A-N-I. Knower, it means a knower of the truth. A jnani understands that pain and pleasure are inescapable opposites. We try to escape them, the ones we don't like, right? But a knower of the truth says that's what the Maya is. It's both. You can't escape it. So they don't try to escape it. But the mind is 100% in their control. That's the difference. The reason why we try to escape those things we don't like is because our mind is not in our control. So if you cannot actually escape them fully, what's left? Strengthen your mind. Increase your control over your mind and all its reactions. It's the only thing we can do. And the knowledge that this supreme devotee has is the direct experience that duality belongs only to Maya and not to themselves. The next point is forgiving. This person, this supreme devotee, is forgiving. Forgiving of what? Well, when people insult or harm him, which we've seen in Amma. When it came time to distribute the houses, she was going to build 20,000 houses. I think this is 25 years ago, around then when she started. And she made sure that the first people to get those houses were those who had, who were very critical of the ashram in the early days. She felt that they needed it most. So such a being can never think of harming someone in return for whatever they did. Not even mentally can they think of harming them, because they see the other person as themselves, their very own self. When we commit a mistake, we try to justify our mistakes, saying, I did it for this reason. No, I had no choice. I couldn't do it because this kept me from doing the right thing. So we try to justify our mistakes, but Amma, she tries to justify other people's mistakes. When people come to complain about somebody, Amma will always say things like, he's not God realized, or when he grew up, he didn't get enough love, or she didn't get enough love, or he had a terrible relationship with his parents. She may not have even heard that from that person directly, but she can describe these things. So she and even if someone does something to Amma, like they do something that was not right, Amma will never criticize them for it. She will justify them. Don't worry, they didn't know any better, etc., etc. So basically, Amma sees all of us as little children. Whether we think we're grown up or not is a different matter altogether. She sees us as little kids who just don't know better. But because she sees us as her little children, she knows that through her pure love, she can make a change in our heart. They are also ever content, Krishna says, fully contented, satisfied, self-sufficient. It's hard to imagine because for us, contentment comes and goes, just like the wind blows. When we get something we want, then we feel satisfied for a little while. We forget that satisfaction is coming only because we have temporarily forgotten all the other things that we want. We get one thing at a time. We can only experience one thing at a time. So the list still may be very, very long, but at least one of those items was temporarily crossed off. But when it's over, the next thing. I want the next thing. I want the next thing. So Amma knows that no matter how many finite worldly things we acquire, there's no such thing as satisfaction. Everything is finite, so they don't even go there. They don't even try to get any satisfaction from the objects of the world because they know it's impossible and they've already found that wellspring of infinite bliss. So they don't need to either. But it's important that we learn that from them, from Amma. She never seeks her pleasure in the world. She enjoys, devotional practices with everybody. That's her, favorite thing is to sing bhajans with everybody, meditate with everybody. But she doesn't depend on it for her satisfaction. I think it's more about seeing us embracing her way of life. That certainly shows that we are gradually freeing ourselves from bondage and suffering. So that would make her happy. Not that she needs anybody to make her happy. You understand, it's a figure of speech. The next point is steady in meditation. So this means one who has a balanced mind. So Shankaracharya says that yogi, it's actually, the word is yogi that comes here. And his commentary is that this means integrated without a break, his mind being concentrated. So such a person who can focus without any break, their mind is well concentrated. This is the kind of person that he's talking about. Of course, if you're God realized, of course it's like that. But this is more of a sort of a yardstick for us to use for ourselves. No thought occurs in his mind without his own permission. With us, even if we don't want to think about something, it comes. Especially if someone says, don't think about this or that, that's what comes up in the mind. So sometimes when you're trying to meditate, the mind will come up with all kinds of other things. This is the state that such a person will never experience. The supreme devotee has full control over his mind, and whatever thoughts he wants to come there or she wants to come there, only those thoughts will come. So we are definitely struggling to get this kind of mind. But Amma says that through prolonged effort, it won't happen all at once, but gradually we will be able to regulate our thoughts much more than now. So it's like learning a language or a musical instrument. You see somebody who's an expert and they make it seem effortless. But if it's a foreign language that they learned, on their own, or they learned from, in this case, a better analogy would be from a native speaker, that means they look effortless because they already put in a lot of effort. So effortlessness comes from a lot of effort. Think of it that way in spirituality. So there's no escaping effort. The lazy person will say, well, this person did it without effort, that person did it without effort. But Amma says, no. If it looks effortless in this lifetime, the past lifetimes, they made a lot of effort. So there's no escape for anybody. Self-controlled is another factor, another quality mentioned. Amma has disciplined herself to sing bhajans every day, for example. But she doesn't need to. She doesn't need to. I mean, she is experiencing God all the time. It's her own self. She knows that. But she does it. It's like she forces herself to do it because it is good for us. And thanks to her, it has also become a positive habit for all of us. So Shankaracharya says this part is talking about someone who has a disciplined mind, a disciplined nature, particularly. Both the physical body and the subtle body, right? Subtle body, in case you're not sure, is comprised of the 5 sense organs, smell, hearing, etc., as well as the subtle organs of action, like speech and moving, etc. It also includes the mind, which is the emotions, the chitta, which is the subconscious storehouse of all memories from past lives and this life, and the ego and the intellect. So all these things are completely disciplined for such a person. He also says this person is possessed of firm, or we could also say steady, conviction. Conviction regarding what? It is firm knowledge. Firm knowledge that the self, or we could call Brahman, is the only truth and the world is constantly changing. Right now, we read that, but we don't have the conviction of it because we don't experience it. Nothing close to it. I mean, maybe I'm speaking for myself. Maybe you are feeling that much more than I. But for one who doesn't experience that knowledge that I am Brahman, it's very hard to have a steady conviction in that, right? There will always be some doubting in the mind. So virtues cannot be maintained without that firm conviction. I think this is where a lot of us struggle, because we read the books, we see what Amma does, but there's always something inside of us that, like doubts and questions and lack of clarity about how that can be possible. So we start to get consumed by such doubts, and it can be a source of disappointment in life, because we feel like we're trying on the spiritual path, but someday some disappointment or some upset may take place in our life because we were relying more on the world than on the self. That's where this problem with conviction comes in. When our conviction is shaky, we start to rely on the world more, and we don't rely on ourself or on God, on Guru as much. But this leaning on the world will always lead to disappointment. So then our faith will be shaken, right? And if by chance someone comes along at that time, preaching some kind of materialism, that is when we're at our weakest point, we might get enticed to just throw away all the spirituality. The mind will say, like, what if spirituality is just a hoax? Then all this time I've been controlling my desires for nothing. I could have been enjoying life all this time. You may have seen people who go from one extreme to the other. This is because the conviction wasn't strong enough. So just be clear that Amma knows who she is and what she is doing, and she will never ever forget that. So even if we cannot, if we don't know who we are, and if we don't know what we're doing and where we're going, you just stick with Amma. That is the life preserver that will keep us from drowning in the ocean of samsara. He also says, Krishna says that the mind and intellect are fixed on him. So Shankaracharya says that the mind is what imagines and doubts, while the intellect decides. So he says that Krishna is referring to one who has fixed both the emotions and the intellect on him, on God. So all of these qualities, they seem kind of overwhelming, but we should understand that if we want happiness, we need to cultivate those. He's telling us all these things, and Amma is demonstrating all of these for us. As you can see, the list is just a description of Amma. Just because it's good for us. We need to do those things. Just imagine if the doctor would actually come with you and jog with you and eat healthy foods with you. That would be the best way, because they're not just telling you in a short, interaction and then seeing the next patient. If they could live with you and show you how to do it, that would be the best way. And that's exactly what Amma is doing. So those qualities, all the virtues that we need to cultivate, she's living them and showing them to us so we can learn them firsthand. So we'll move on to verse 15 now. Yasman nodvijate loko lokan nodvijate chayaha harsha marsha bhayodveger mukto yah Sachame priyaha. So here the translation is he by whom others are not annoyed. We can say also not agitated, not afraid. All of these apply here. And who cannot be annoyed, who cannot be agitated, who cannot be frightened by others. I think there's an unnecessary the here, right? Yeah, so just forget about that. I think it's a bit of a mistake. Who is freed from delight, or we could say exaltation. Free from exaltation, envy, fear, and anxiety. That devotee of mine is dear to me. So, Shankaracharya says here, he is free from the feelings of elation, intolerance, fear, and agitation. Elation, or what the word is harsha here, is the mind's upsurge when anything pleasurable is acquired. It is marked by goosebumps, tears, and so on. Intolerance is impatience. Fear is the emotion due to alarm. Agitation is the state of the antagonized mind. So the person, this supreme devotee, has none of these problems. So it also shows why that word elation comes in. We'll come back to that in a moment. So this is yet another list, 6 points to add to our list, to-do list. He's not annoying others. He practices absolute ahimsa or non-violence in thought, word, and action. It's just like when a sannyasi, Swami, takes that sannyasa diksha or the initiation. They call out to the whole universe and chant, I will not be a sort of disturbance to anyone, all animals, human beings, even all the devatas, the subtle beings. None of you need be frightened of me. I will not disturb anyone. Not consciously, of course. If we don't know what we're stepping on, tiny microbes and everything. The idea is that not intentionally. This person doesn't get annoyed either. So they not only don't annoy others, but they themselves don't get annoyed. Some people are sensitive, and though they may not affect others, they get hurt easily. Like a rose petal or something, very soft and fragile. But this supreme devotee is not like that. He is soft in nature and doesn't get hurt in any situation. You may have heard some people, or in one of the books, I think it was in the beginning of Amma's biography, Amma is as soft as a flower but hard as a diamond. I love that expression. It means to me that she's soft toward others but very hard on herself, which is a very unique combination, because people who are really resolute, they have really strong willpower, sometimes lack compassion. But Amma has both. You may have heard about how long Amma spent consoling the tsunami victims in late 2004, early 2005. They lost so many of their family members, and every day somebody would be coming and crying in her arms, and she would cry with them, just to share in their pain. She had so much compassion and love for these people. She wouldn't sleep for weeks, because after the immediate needs, she started building houses. She wouldn't sleep either, because she wanted to make sure that these people would get in those temporary shelters, permanent houses. For months, she was just pushing herself so much out of compassion. But shortly after the actual tsunami, there was a funeral, because one small portion of the coastal area, almost everybody in that village passed away due to the tsunami. And there were people remaining, of course, and they had to complete the final last rites for their loved ones. So it was maybe a half an hour walk from the ashram, and it was a boiling hot day. And Amma insisted on going to that funeral. And when she came out of her room and started walking, people noticed that she was barefoot. And it was, barefoot in India, if you've ever tried that on the asphalt road, which is what they had to walk along, it's like frying the bottom of your feet. And people were begging her to wear shoes, because even they were wearing shoes, that they themselves, because they know how painful it is. Amma said, no, these people have suffered so much. Let me feel some of their pain. She walked all the way there and all the way back barefoot. And you don't want to know what the bottom of her feet looked like after that. Soft to suffering people, but very tough on herself. Such a person doesn't get elated either. So what's wrong with getting elated? Like Krishna says, like Shankaracharya said, the word that's used is harsha. It means it's a happiness that comes when something pleasurable is experienced. So it means pleasure-generated happiness. Now that's a problem for sure, because we're getting lost in the pleasure. That's all it is. It's some kind of temporary worldly pleasure, and we lose ourselves in that. So it's going away from God. So it also sort of compromises our proper judgment, because when we're completely immersed in pleasure, we're not thinking straight. But the intense happiness that comes through devotion, that's another thing altogether. That we call anandam, bliss. The bliss of devotion makes us forget not God, but it makes us forget our selfishness, all our other worldly desires. And it has no negative side effects. But that's not what elation is. That's not what they're talking about here. Elation without discernment can lead to negative outcomes, but bliss of devotion will never lead to anything negative. The next quality is freedom from envy. In general, it means comparing yourself with others. That's what envy is. You compare yourself with somebody else and you think, oh, I wish I had what they have, etc. And then you start saying, why do they do that? Showing off their wealth or showing off their car or whatever it is. So we are also intolerant of them. We're impatient with them. Anytime you compare yourself with somebody else, the outcome is going to be one of these things, right? So from the spiritual standpoint, though, we would have to say that it's impossible to compare oneself with another. Because we're, like we said before, we're all in different states of growth. We have different samskara, different tendencies we bring with us from past lives. And some people are going to evolve quickly. Some people are going to evolve slowly. Some people are attached to the wealth. Some people are less attached. Whatever it is, it's all due to what came before this life, that momentum that we ourselves created. And we don't know what that is. Fortunately, God has erased the memory bank so we can start afresh. Amma has said that if we didn't have that, if we remembered all of our past life experiences, it would make it very difficult to live in this world with all these people. You have a history with them, and if you know what that is, it'll just make things worse. So typically when we see people who are like materially better off than us, we feel jealous. We may even develop an inferiority complex around them. But Amma is not like that at all, right? She doesn't feel jealous of anybody. Now, why not? Because she doesn't need to compare herself with anybody else. Okay, yeah, she's the greatest, hugger in the world, right? No, not because of that. Because she is one with the totality. If you're one with everything, then how can you have any personal desires of your own? And what is there to compare yourself to? There's nothing. It's all you. So there's no scope for comparison. And if you look even on the changing level of the world, all this we call anatma, all these things that come and go, even then, there's no need for her to compare what she has with what someone else has, because she knows they don't give any satisfaction at all. Our problem is that we think, maybe I'll get some pleasure, some happiness from this thing or that thing. They don't have that delusion at all. And one other point that comes up in this verse is freedom from fear. The Upanishads have beautiful statements like, the knower is not afraid of anything. And whenever one gets fearlessly established in this imperceivable, bodiless, inexpressible, unsupported Brahman, in other words, it doesn't need anything to support it, he reaches the state of fearlessness. So for us, how does fear come about? There are three basic sources. Myself, in some way, something in my surroundings, and maybe something that is beyond anybody's control, some supernatural causes, of like an asteroid or, a volcano or something. Nobody can control it. So that third category is about, things that nobody can control. And this supreme devotee has no fear in any of these levels. If we talk about ourselves, there's our body, maybe healthy or unhealthy, our mind, we have our possessions, we think about our future and whatnot, but they're not interested in that at all. They have no fear about that at all. They're not afraid of other people. They're not afraid of their surroundings, countries. I know that Amma's not even afraid of aliens. People have come to her with these stories about aliens and whatnot. Amma says, there's enough people here on the planet that need happiness, that Amma's focusing here. She's not worried about, what's happening in other planets and outer space. Fear comes from our inability to accept certain outcomes in life about ourselves, about our surroundings, about things that we control, that nobody can control. But Amma has the inner strength to accept anything, so that's why she has no fear. She also knows that it's not the circumstances that matter, it's our heart. It's our inner strength that matters. And the longer we endure hardship, actually the stronger we become. People say, oh no, Shani, Saturn is coming to attack me and I have such a bad period of Saturn coming. It's going to be terrible. And, from the astrological standpoint, actually, Saturn makes you stronger. And when you're stronger, the suffering affects you less. One astrologer told a man, your chart says that you're going to suffer for 7.5 years. And the guy's heart skipped a beat. And he said, okay, so will things get better after that? The astrologer looks at the chart and he says, well, in one way. After those 7.5 years, you'll get used to it. And then you'll stop thinking of it as suffering at all. No, I'm not really hoping that anybody has to experience that. But the hardship does make us stronger. So Amma says we should, that's what tapas is. We make ourselves stronger so that we are capable of accepting any outcome in life. Then we don't have to worry about things. We don't need any fear. And he says also in this verse that such a knower is free from anxiety. So disappointment, pain, mental disturbance, all these things are completely foreign to him or her. Sometimes Amma will say, oh, this is my prarabdha, but don't believe her because we know she doesn't have any karma. She says it's my karma that this happens or that happened. It's not her karma. If anything, she's taking on our karma, or she's showing us that actually it's your attitude that matters. This may be a very difficult circumstance that I'm in, but if you follow me and do what I do, in other words, she means have a proper attitude, then you can transcend all the challenges in life without anxiety. Because fate and all these, the unknown future can only affect our external conditions. When people visualize things and start to get anxious or, they get that anxiety inside and tension, it's because they are visualizing an outcome that they don't want and they don't like. So, but what if you liked all outcomes? You could receive all of them. Not only no fear, also no anxiety. We will move on to the 16th verse, which will be the last one for today. Anapeksha Shuchirdaksha Udasino Gadavyataha Sarvarambha Parityagi Yo Madbhakta Same Priyaha. The meaning is one who wants nothing, who is, and then we can put this part in parenthesis, both internally and externally. That's not in the actual verse, it's in the commentary. So brackets, both internally and externally. Pure, prompt, which I think is better translated as capable. Unconcerned, which is probably better translated as impartial. Untroubled, or we could say free from anxiety again. Renouncing, and again in parenthesis, the sense of doership in. That's not coming in the actual verse, but that's the meaning implied. Again, it shows up in the commentary. All undertakings that devotee of mine is dear to me. So actually, literally, it's one who wants nothing, who is pure, capable, impartial, untroubled, renouncing all undertakings. That devotee of mine is dear to me. So, we have 6 more points for our list, to-do list. He wants nothing. Shankaracharya says that he craves nothing of what concerns the body, senses, and objects. So he's completely indifferent to their demands. He doesn't require anything in order to be happy. This is just an explanation of Amma. She is always happy. She's secure, composed. Her mind is like an ocean. Rivers may join the ocean or not, but the ocean is always full. So even when nobody was there, when Amma was all on her own, in the early days on the beach, meditating on Devi, it didn't matter that nobody was there. And her happiness was definitely not dependent on how others treated her. Not then and not now also. The word pure, Shankaracharya fortunately clarifies here that it is both external and internal cleanliness. Just think, when you throw in the mental cleanliness there, it becomes a much higher benchmark to reach. Just imagine if, like we had these COVID tests, and they're testing the presence of a virus. What if that test would also reveal all the other viruses Amma talks about? Anger, desire, all kinds of terrible negativities we have. If they could see what's there in our mind, the machine, nobody would go for that test. They would stay far away from such a machine. So thank God thank Amma for hiding all of our thoughts so nobody knows what we're thinking. If we have a negative thought, or I should say when we have a negative thought about someone, it's actually an opportunity to ask ourselves the question that Amma asks when people complain. After saying that person's not God realized, or he didn't get much affection when he was little, she will say to us, don't you have weaknesses also? I've seen her do that many times. So after, explaining some background about that person, she invites us to look at our own weaknesses. So we can do that anytime we have a negative thought about somebody else. And capable, why does capable come here? I mean, what does that have to do with spirituality? Well, Shankaracharya is just a savior for all these, words that are kind of easily misunderstood. He says capable means this person is competent to grasp factually and at once all kinds of developments. This is exactly what Amma does. You must have heard, or maybe some of you were even there when the tsunami happened back in 2014. Amma was the conductor of this orchestra of activity that was going on around her to deliver the maximum amount of relief to the maximum amount of people for the maximum amount of time. She was the one, her mind was crystal clear. Because there's no concern for themselves there, right? The reason why we don't have that clarity to see just the facts and the important trends and decision points that need to be made for the sake of others. We can't do that so well because we're focused. There's always something, what about me? What about me? What's in it for me? That's not there in Amma's case and in the case of this supreme devotee. So their mind is ever clear. They can make sudden decisions because they can always make the right decision because their mind is free from any selfishness. That's why when Amma gives advice, sometimes at that time, it seems wrong. And just by habit, some of us, might think, why is she saying that? I can't believe it. Maybe I should tell her something, try to convince her, talk her out of it. But I'll give you an example. This very ashram where we are, Chicago ashram, where I am, a number of people tried to persuade Amma to not buy this place. I mean, she didn't buy it. There were a bunch of options. She selected this one. And then they were trying to talk her out of it because they thought it was going to be too much work and so on. Many, many issues were there at the time. She says, no, this is the one. Almost 9 years later, now we know why, because so much has happened here, and I won't go into all of it, but the point is that there's 50 people living here now. On the high season we have 70 people, and so many people have made this home. So at that time she saw all those children in her mind clearly, and there's even more things coming she has in mind. So she knew that because she doesn't have any personal desires of her own. She knew it was going to be a lot of work, a lot of time and energy, but she made the judgment from a point of selflessness. And that word unconcerned, we will have to render that as impartial, just to avoid that sense that they don't care. They're just disinterested. In fact, there is one translation where they translate this word as disinterested. We really don't want that. Shankaracharya says that it means that he doesn't take sides with friends. So other translations would be free from affection, uninvolved, neutral. So this person has equal love, consideration, and compassion for all, not just those who are nice to him or her, their family members or whatnot. They're untroubled, or we could say free from anxiety. They're free from all kinds of sorrow, pain, disturbance. And in some, they have all the inner, this is all inner disturbances. Before, it was more just general about pain and trouble. This is all the now internal disturbances, so completely free from those kind of things. And this person has renounced the sense of doership. So it's a selfless person in all undertakings. Shankaracharya clarifies by saying undertakings here means desire-based activities aimed at pleasures here and hereafter. So not just India, but a lot of countries in the ancient days, a lot of what they did was not for this life. They had such a strong faith in the afterlife that they would make a lot of effort to preserve or to reserve or kind of create a space for themselves in the afterworld. You must have seen the pyramids of Egypt and everything. It's so much effort just to bury somebody. But that thought process, even for a peasant, it was a common activity. They would do things to go to heaven, and a special kind of heaven, have special experiences there. These are all considered to be desire-based activities also. So nothing like that. They don't do anything, whether it's to better themselves in this world or in another world. It's all coming from selfishness, and they don't engage in anything like that. So they're not for all of their actions are not for their own fulfillment. Just think of Amma. She does so much for the world, and she doesn't do a thing for herself. That's what just drives so many of us crazy. She will give her body only enough to keep it functioning. She helps needy people to get an education for a brighter future, but she never thinks of her own future. We don't know what to do about her future, but in other words, she doesn't even ask what's for dinner tonight, for example. Never. Do I have clothes to wear tomorrow? She's just completely surrendered because she knows that God will take care of someone who's completely surrendered. We cannot completely surrender because we have too much me, too much I happening in our minds. So someday we'll be able to just surrender completely. But Now we can learn from Amma how she plans for all kinds of institutions without having any burden in her heart. Imagine, how can you do that? Schools, colleges, ashrams, hospitals, orphanages. I mean, so many, the list goes on and on and on. How can you do all that without any mental burden? Because she knows it's not for her sake. She doesn't want any of it for herself. She may never even go there, who knows? But she has that transcendent vision of how to relieve people's sorrow. So in her case, it's not an effort to become full. Rather, it comes from the fullness of love and compassion within her. That is the driving force for everything she does. So that is actually, anybody who's a knower of the self will understand the suffering of other people and will do whatever they can to relieve that suffering. So all of their actions are only for that. I would say, though, Amma is special because she's born like this. She didn't achieve this state through some, sadhana of her own. It was already there. It was a complete package upon birth, divine incarnation. At the end of this verse, Jnanadev has one quote that I really love. He's just praising his devotees to the sky. And he does that in such a, inimitable way. You can never kind of copy his style. It's just so unique. And he's praising the devotee and all the features and qualities that the devotee has. And he says, I feel a great hankering after such a devotee. And I meditate on such a devotee. We're supposed to be meditating on the Guru. No, the Guru is meditating on such a devotee. No, I feel satisfied only when I secure such a devotee. For him or her, I must take incarnation and move about in this world. They are so dear to me. Think about, what is Amma doing? She took this birth and she travels all over the world because we are dear to her. We have to live up to that now, right? So the only way we can, and then she doesn't expect anything from us, but the only way we can truly live up to that description that he gives, and Amma surely feels as well, is to live these qualities that she's talking about, that Krishna is talking about. Same thing. So that's the conclusion of the text for today. We covered 4 verses again. And there were a few questions, really just basic questions. I already answered really the only one that needed a concrete response, which was the spelling of Jnanadev. It's there in the chat window. I'll paste it one more time in case somebody missed it. Put it here one more time. Yeah, okay, there it is. Yeah, so thank you. And I want to apologize for those people who had requested links for the videos and maybe didn't get them right away. The reality is that we're trying to, as we get more and more requests for that. I guess the point is it's in demand. That's what I was getting at. As we get more and more requests, we're trying to think of a better way to provide them, the links. I still don't want them to be public on YouTube. It seems just, for me right now, I think it's not the way that I'd like to do it. But we can we're working on a way to make those links available for anybody who needs them. You won't be able to search them and find them on YouTube, but you can get the links. So we'll figure that out. Please bear with us in the meantime. And we will do our best to make that available as soon as we can. I know you were watching the second chapter before I got back, and suddenly we jumped into the 12th chapter. Some of you may be feeling a little distraught at the sudden change, but there are other people who've been watching, who've been coming, participating from the beginning, so I just have to keep going from where we left off. So thank you all so much for joining us here, and we will chant the closing mantras now, and after that we will have a short meditation. We'll dim the lights and we'll give ourselves some time to meditate on these teachings, try to absorb them and make them our own. It does take a few extra minutes, so those who don't have time, East Coast or somewhere else in the world, please don't feel like you have to stay on for the meditation. But the intention is to sort of assimilate all these things that we've been thinking about and contemplating on it in our mind. We want to make it sink deeper into ourselves. So we'll conclude with Asatoma and Loka Samasta. Loka Samasta will be just 3 times. Om Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Those of you who are staying for the meditation, close your eyes, check your posture. Try to keep your back and neck relatively straight while remaining in a relaxed sitting posture. Take a few long, deep breaths. And feel the body and mind relaxing further and further with each deep inhalation and exhalation. Try to feel a subtle spiritual energy all around you. As though she were embracing you in her arms, the arms of her universal form. You too are part of that universal form. So try to feel that light shining within you. Now shift your awareness to the rhythmic flow of your breathing process. Be fully conscious of each breath as you inhale and exhale, immersing all of your thoughts in that peaceful flow. Don't let even a single breath escape without your awareness. As you focus on your breath in this way, the mind becomes more and more subtle. And you begin to feel that subtle energy that is carried in and out of the body with each deep inhalation and exhalation. When you breathe in, feel a pure energy being brought into the body through the vehicle of the breath. That life force, that prana shakti, is subtler than the actual breath itself. But you can feel a rejuvenation, a revitalization in the whole body with each breath. Once we are focused on that prana shakti, that life force energy, we also can understand that it does not belong to us alone. There is only one life force in this whole universe, and we share it with all beings. When we breathe in, it comes, it is all pervasive. From around us, it comes inside the body and rejuvenates us on a subtler level than the body. This is proof that our being, our existence, goes beyond this body. We share the prana shakti with all beings. And that power is the closest thing that we know as an all-pervasive existence. It is all-pervasive like space, but it is an enlivening factor. You can start from there. By focusing your awareness on the life force that comes in and out with each breath. As your consciousness becomes fixed on that life force, try to shift your standpoint. Try to witness that life force. It is not you. You're not identifying with it. You're watching it. Try to identify with the one who is watching, the witness. In times of complete clarity, we may witness that clearly. And when we do, that is giving us a glimpse of being established in pure consciousness, even just for a moment. The witness is nothing other than consciousness. If the mind wanders, you bring it back again and again, over and over. Now let us conclude with one final mantra, Purnamada. And we will conclude with that. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Namah Shivaya. Thank you all for joining. I hope to see you all during the retreat. Not this weekend, but the following weekend. We will be having bhajans the day after tomorrow here. But then the next biggest thing is going to be Swamiji's retreat. So we won't have Gita class next week. Let's focus all of our energies and save up our time for that alone, that retreat. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm sure a lot of you are as well. So until then, we'll see you hopefully for bhajans on Saturday, and then retreat. It's going to be wonderful.